saw a video from Professor Chang, and he's talking about the cost of the Iran war could be anywhere from between 34 and 42 billion dollars. I tend to think it's closer to 42 billion. And by the way, that's off the books. That's off the books. We haven't paid for it. In fact, Congress hasn't even seen the bill yet. They haven't seen the invoice of this war. It was fought before they discussed the budget. So that's going to be a big topic of discussion later this year. In fact, I think the midterms are a wrap. I think that incumbents are in trouble for any number of reasons, you know. But this war is being fought off the books. So the American people really don't know the cost of it. In fact, Congress doesn't even know the cost of it yet. But, and you know, there's so many things that are up in the air. We don't know what's going to be happening in the years to come, especially like with AI, and which is, I mean, some people are on top of it. Some people know. Some people are doing their research. And if I was you, I'd be doing my research right now. How can you stay protected from this AI bubble? And by, I mean the economic bubble. Because I should say more or less it's jobs bubble. Because they're predicting AI to wipe out, I think, 300 million jobs worldwide. Now, I can't speak to what's going to happen in Switzerland or what's going to happen in Argentina, but I will speak to what's going to happen here in the U.S. And if you're in Europe or you're in Asia, you can talk too. I mean, wherever you are, Brazil, this is going to affect you as well. But you need to be doing some research. You know, how can I protect myself from an economic crash, from a jobs crash? You know, what kind of skills do I have? What kind of skills do you have? The white collar jobs, I'm not a white collar guy. I've always been a blue collar guy. And oddly enough, for years they said blue collar jobs are in trouble. Blue collar jobs would be shrinking. And oddly enough, blue collar jobs will be the ones that are protected, at least at first. Blue collar jobs are the ones that are safe, at least at first. White collar jobs, administrative, accounting, they're not going to need nearly the amount of white collar jobs and middle management that they have now. That's going to be, I think, all but wiped out. So if that's what you're into, you know, I'd start working on some other skills. But I can understand, I mean, if you've been in white collar your whole life, you don't know anything about welding in all likelihood. You don't know anything about truck driving, you don't know anything about oil field, oil and gas. You don't know anything about that kind of stuff. But you better start looking into it. HVAC. Learn HVAC. not just learning the skills, but learning the administrative behind it, so you can maybe have your own little company. Because AI is going to do away with a lot of jobs in the next 5 to 7 years. It's going to change everything. And I've been doing a lot of research. How can we stay protected? Real estate is another thing. Real estate, because people are always going to need housing, and populations will probably always grow. So housing is something else that you might want to get into. Home repairs. Not just buying the real estate, but home repairs. Can you start your own handyman company? Watching from India. Thank you for watching. Thank you so much. I mean, I wonder how AI is going to affect India. I wonder if it's going to improve the way of life there. I just, there's so many questions. So many questions. Schooling. I've said for a while, I think the current school system, the way it's set up, is outdated. It's an outdated model. I mean, do kids really need to go to school from 6 years old to 18? With all the technology in our hand and information in our hand and education in our hand, now AI, I think that's going to change as well. I think everything's going to change. You got autonomous cars. Autonomous cars will be delivering food and delivering passengers. Uber, DoorDash, Uber Eats, Lyft. That's already happening out in San Francisco. They have autonomous cars. I forget exactly what they call them, but driverless cars that pick up and deliver passengers. It's already happening. Slowly. It's a slow rollout. But in the next 5 to 7 years, the world as we know it is going to be different. Very, very different. And so you better start looking into and researching how you can protect your income, protect your little economic world. What's going to happen to ownership? I was doing some research on that the other day. There's not a lot of precedent for the government seizing control of private property and stuff like that, but I mean, there's a first time for everything, and when everything changes, will private property be protected? UBI is another, thing. Universal basic income. If you have, millions and millions of jobs that have gone by the wayside, millions and millions of jobs that are going by the wayside, that are leaving. I mean, it may come down to, the government offering UBI, some sort of universal basic income. Now, I know that's kind of controversial. It's weird because there was a politician years ago, I think his name was Wang or Yang. He was an Asian man, and he was running for president, and he was talking about universal basic income, and everyone kind of scoffed at him. And say, oh, it's unrealistic. That's never going to happen. Man, I tell you what, I think that's UBI is on its way. Now, the interesting thing about UBI, I don't think everyone's going to have to take it. I think that it will be offered to some. It will be offered to everyone, I think, pretty much. If you're under a certain, maybe if you're under a certain income level, maybe it might be offered to everyone. But you won't have to take it if you don't want to. I think the best thing is probably not to take it. At least if you don't have to. Because, there's no such thing as a free ride, like they used to tell me. And you start taking, government assistance or UBI from the government, they're going to want to call shots. They're going to want to spy. They're going to want to look in. They're going to want to, the invasion of privacy. They're going to want to know how you're spending the money. They're probably going to know what you're posting on social media. They're going to want to know a lot of your bank account, everything. So, if you can, it's going to be interesting because I think it might come down to the go-getters, the hustlers, the hard workers, those that are smart, innovative. They may have a much higher standard of living, and those that settle for UBI, universal basic income, will live maybe a sort of a just base standard of living. Where they'll get the basics. They'll live basic. But they'll have $1,000 a month that will cover rent, and that'll cover maybe cover your mortgage and so forth, But it could cause a separation. It could be a great thing if you're a hustler, you're a hard worker, you're smart, you're innovative, you got a big mind for business. You might live better than you ever have. AI gets rid of 100 million jobs in the U.S. You might live better than you ever have. Like I said, everything's up in the air. Everything's up in the air. We don't know what's going to happen. It might be a fun time for certain people. Another thing I was researching is stocks. Like, what's going to happen to the stock market if at first stocks might love it. Investors might love it. Boardrooms might love it. You get rid of 100 million jobs, you get rid of 100 million, that's 100 million off the payroll. But eventually, who's going to be buying your product if people don't have jobs? So the stock market's going to be very interesting in, say, 5 to 7 years. One thing, no matter what, I appreciate I appreciate seeing the sun. I appreciate seeing nature and the trees, seeing the wind rustle through the leaves. Of course, I don't see no wind today. It's just nothing but hot. Ooh. But those who have unique skills, I mean, you know, if you're a truck driver, and I don't mean like you're just a box driver, like you just drive, you haul a 53-foot van or something like that. I don't mean that. I'm talking about you know how to do off-road. You know how to haul pipeline. You know how to do oil, you know, haul sand, flatbed, pneumatic tanker, you know, stuff like that. I mean, those that work in the oil and gas, mechanics, people that work on the pumps and the engines and stuff like that in the oil and gas field. Welders, especially if you're good. And you better get a skill. You better get a blue-collar skill. And maybe we'll talk about this later today. Maybe I'll go live later today and we'll talk about blue-collar skills. I'm always interested to know what, like, if someone is, again, I'm in my 50s, so it's a little different. But if I was 4 years old, and you're like, what? I'd love to know what, and I talk to young people from time to time, and some of them seem concerned, but some of them don't. You know, and maybe that's just because of youth. You know, you just feel like, you know, everything's just going to be okay. I love to know what young people think. I love to know what young people think. And because, I mean, you got your whole life in front of you. If you're 23 years old, let me see, I started driving truck at 22. So I was already thinking about, you know, career, which may have been a little soon. You know, I always look back on my career and I kind of, you know, I'm glad I got my CDO at 22, but I should have enjoyed life a little bit more before I got out here on the grind like this. But neither here nor there. I mean, what do you think as a young person? I mean, because a lot of young people are upset because they don't see a path forward as far as the American dream. They don't. I mean, a house. A lot of them can't afford a new house, or I mean, you know, get a house, a decent home. They can't even get a job to afford, you know, to get a home. If you had to come up with $8,000 to $10,000 to put down on a home, a lot of these young people can't even afford it. They can't even get it. A lot of them, I mean, it's just hard because the jobs don't pay. It's not like it was in the 60s and the 70s and even the 80s where, you know, a lot of these factories and plants and these jobs paid fantastic, you know. And you can make money, save money, you can spend money, have fun. You can buy things, buy a home, you can buy 2 cars. Those days are just walking into a plant or factory and filling out an application and making a boatload of money. Wow, can you imagine? Those days are over. Those days are over. I caught the tail end of it, the very tail end of it. We haven't even touched on religion. Like, how's AI going to affect religion and people who believe in God? You know, oddly enough, seems to be a little bit of a resurgence in the belief in God. I think a lot of us who grew up going to church and maybe became disillusioned, you know, for any number of reasons. A lot of us sort of have a fresh perspective on God and what it's all about. And really understanding that God is, you know, God is within. God is not some entity, you know, a billion miles away. You know, a trillion miles away. That you gotta pray really hard to find, and you gotta pray really hard for him to hear you. We realize that now that, you know, God is within. I mean, you don't even have to pray hard. I think that's, you know, a misnomer. I mean, that's not to say you can't pray hard every once in a while. You got something, you know, you need a fervent prayer, you know, but how will AI shape the future of churches, stuff like that?